can only imagine what I have. Rain poncho,
It's nice
just
to
in
have
case.
a tech.
Right?
Oh, nice.
You know.
Do you have flares?
No, I don't. Antibacterial hand wipes.
Of course.
You never know.
How about hand warmers in case you get stuck somewhere?
Let's see, a little notebook in case you need to write something down.
Uh-huh.
All right. Band-aids.
Uh-huh.
Just in case here. A teeny tiny little, this is a bag. So if you're like grocery shopping or getting one thing and you don't have to use a bag. Okay.
Hi, Rabbi.
Got the old wallet.
Hey, Arona.
I have a request.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know who your learning agenda is this evening, but I was wondering if we could learn a memory of my mother's husband, my stepfather, who passed away this morning.
Oh, Arona. I'm so
It's okay.
sorry.
It's okay.
So please tell me.
Zev Ben Frida.
Zev Ben Frida. And do you know his father's name by any chance?
I could look it up real quick in the
That's
text
okay.
message.
You don't have to. Okay.
Hold on,
Our learning tonight will be Le'ili Nishmas Zev Ben Frida, who is Arona's father-in-law who passed away today. And thoughts are with you, Arona.
Thank you.
Okay.
All I see is Zadie. Frida and Zadie. I mean, it's my stepfather, so I don't know. Yeah. Ginsburg. That's about all I got.
Yeah. All right. That's fine.
Thank you. Thank you.
As long as we began with that, so our learning should also, here, let me just do this. Our learning should be in the merit of the speedy and healthy. Hello? A speedy and healthy return of our hostages.
Yes.
Of the healing for those who are injured, the comforting for those who are bereaved, the protection of our soldiers, the protection of everyone in Israel, for the protection of all of us. So I want to say again hello to Arona, and our thoughts are with her. Hello to Doris. I saw you briefly, Doris, and thank you for being here. Also, my dad and Judy, and Liz and Lois. And here in our studio audience, we have Chana and we have Jason. Representing all of you, Liz chickened out and she's I forgot what her excuse was. It wasn't really an excuse. Whatever the excuse was, it wasn't a real excuse. As I just muted you. I'm sorry about that. There was something. Okay. So, in the first Godfather movie,
say one line and then I'll take care of the rest.
I've never seen it.
Give me a scene.
It's not personal, Sonny.
It's just business.
It's strictly business.
Right, yeah.
Now there, Michael Corleone, played by Al Pacino, is trying to assure his older brother, Sonny, that he is being rational. He has just proposed the killing of two men who are responsible for the shooting and the protection of the shooter of their father. And so he's proposed it, but Sonny's laughing because he's saying, you know, you're just emotional. You don't know what you're talking about. You have no idea what you're saying you're going to do. And Michael assures him that he knows what he's suggesting. This is rational. This is not based on just emotions. This seems to be what he means when he says this phrase. It's not personal, Sonny. It's strictly business. Right. So there are other people, when they use this phrase, they don't use it exactly like he used it, but they'll say it's not personal. What they seem to mean when they say that, is that what they seem to mean when they say that is that they don't mean for this to hurt you. They didn't make this decision to hurt you. They're making this decision because it's a business decision and we're engaged in business and that's why we're doing it. But I just want you to know, I'm not trying to hurt you. I don't want to hurt you. All right. Now on to Eric Zornberg. I remember when this came out, when this happened. This is 1998, apparently. But Eric Zornberg wrote a column in the Tribune.
You mean Eric Zorn?
I mean, yeah, I said Zornberg.
Yes.
That's Aviva Zornberg's husband.
Yes.
He did not write the column. Fine gentleman. Very fascinating.
Well. Yes.
Yeah.
I know his wife, who is Jewish.
Yes. So that's probably why he's at a Seder in the first place. Why is Eric Zorn at a Seder in the first place? Because his wife is Jewish and he would be at Sidorim. And he would have been at all manner of Sidorim, you could imagine. And so I just wanted to read a little bit from this column, because I remember when it happened, it got a lot of people agitated, and he didn't back down. There were lots of comments afterwards, and he stuck to his guns.
So he's not Jewish.
He is not, but his wife is.
Okay.
I don't know how they raise their children, but certainly he's in the Jewish milieu. He's somebody who would have, been at Jewish events. Passed over once again at the Passover Seder we attended Saturday was the gruesome, inexplicable injustice wreaked by God upon the young, the innocent, and the hapless of ancient Egypt. Only once or twice in the dozen odd Seders I've been to has anyone raised the central, unfestive issue of slain Egyptian infants that's glossed over in the attendant ritual. And even when it's come up, it's been awkwardly dismissed with such expressions as, yeah, that's always kind of bothered me too. Passover refers to the story in the 12th chapter of Exodus, our Torah portion, in which God one night at midnight kills all firstborn creatures in Egypt, except the children of the enslaved Jews, whose houses he passed over. This was the 10th and worst of the plagues of God that God is said to have visited upon the Egyptian people, the one that finally persuaded Pharaoh to liberate the Jews. Now, it's true Pharaoh had ordered Jewish male infants cast into the Nile earlier in the Exodus, and so was getting a taste of his own medicine. But he was a despicable tyrant. Why, given limitless options, would an all-just, all-powerful God resort to such a ghastly device? The pile of Egyptian corpses the next morning had to include huge numbers of infants and toddlers, not to mention non-Jewish slaves and their children. Everyday Egyptians had no power over their monarch. They awoke to a lifeless kids and spouses and farmyards littered with carcasses. This after having previously endured a horrific series of plagues, including boils, locusts, and bee-movie infestation of frogs. Now, part of the Passover observance involves those at the Seder night resorting the plagues and flicking one drop of wine out of their glasses for each plague, symbolically diminishing the celebration in light of the blood spilled by the blameless. That moment is seldom somber or prolonged. So this moment, like if you had just heard his complaint, you would probably think to answer that there is a moment where we acknowledge the loss of life and indicate that we're not completely ignorant of it or unfeeling. We take that moment. His point is that if it's not taken very seriously, it is there. He's acknowledging it's there, and that it's something that's done. But he's saying that it traditionally is not like, it's not like you take a moment, everybody is silenced, and you do that in a kind of thoughtful meditation in order to acknowledge this difficult question. But rather, it's just done, perfunctory. It's sort of done. And then, he goes out. So he wrote that on April 13th. 8 days later, he writes, correspondences have been very heavy. In response to my April 13th column on the awkward little atrocity upon which the Passover story turns. So he's not showing contrition. He goes through several of the responses that were sent to him. In other words, he's sort of collecting the answers. One answers that Jewish tradition does explicitly mourn the loss of human life necessary to effect the liberation of the Jewish slaves. In other words, this subject does come up. It could be he's referring to something we're going to talk about in a couple minutes when he says this, but we're going to see that there is mention that that the reason that we don't say the full Hallel on the last days of Passover, on the intermediate, but even the last days of Passover, it's mainly the last days of Passover, that we don't say the whole Hallel is because of the Egyptian dead during the splitting of the Red Sea. So it's not true that Jewish tradition is completely ignorant or sanitized of what would be the suffering of Egyptians. That's number one. Number two, there were no innocent Egyptians. This was a common response. They bore communal responsibility for the treatment of the Jews because of the benefits they enjoyed in their failure to overthrow Pharaoh. If a people suffers from the wrongs of their nations, then everyone is responsible to make sure that their nations are honest, fair, and compassionate. And therefore, it's the responsibility of the citizenry to overthrow a tyrannical ruler and not to excuse his behavior as he's a separate tyrannical ruler. Up until now, you're hearing any resonance with anything that might be going on today. All right, number three, the babies in arms and helpless parents died in the 10th plague while Pharaoh and many other actual oppressors survived was not God's fault, but Pharaoh's. In other words, Pharaoh got fair warning. He resisted the will of God, and so the blood of innocence is on his hands, not God's. In other words, there were a series of plagues. Each one of these plagues was meant to be a warning and to get the people out there. He's refusing it. He's refusing it. He's refusing it. And eventually, this is how things built up. And this is how terrible it got until he finally, maybe you want to compare this to dropping the atom bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, something that, in other words, you have to take it to some place where it will stop. Otherwise, things are going to get much worse. Maybe something like that. One moral of the Passover story is that violence and obstinate hatred are displeasing to God and beget more violence and more hatred. So this would be like the, what do you call that? The Hindu.
Live by the sword, die by the sword.
Right, but what's that called? It's called
karma.
Karma. Yeah, our understanding of karma. What you put out there comes back at you. There's another kind of spiritual explanation. All God did was move the souls from this life to the next. In other words, it's not dying is not the worst thing that can happen to somebody.
That sounds like a very Christian response.
Well, the Christians get it from somewhere. I'm not saying it is a Jewish response, but I'm just saying a lot of things.
They experienced. Okay, so people who were left behind, of course, experienced pain because their loved ones died, but the ones who
actually died.
Yeah, was it just like going to sleep?
Right. So for some reason, he's focusing on babies. We know why. He's focusing on babies because they're innocent. And this is the suffering of the innocent. So So he's talking about the suffering of the babies. The babies themselves, they would argue, are not really suffering. When they die, they could be gently taken to the next world. It's not necessarily suffering for babies, but certainly terrible suffering for their parents. But their parents, we don't know they're innocent. Again, these are just answers that were sent to him. We ought not judge God's actions because they're part of a plan whose intricacies we cannot fully understand. This is God's answer to Job, to Eov, that if you understood the whole big picture of things, then you'd get it, but you can't. You're never going to be able to get the whole big picture, so you got to just trust me. Number 7, America was guilty of a similar injustice when it dropped atomic bombs on the citizens of Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the end of World War II. Number 8, although it may be that certain religious beliefs have given comfort to those who have indiscriminately oppressed and slaughtered other people, it's misleading to use Judaism as a way into that discussion. In other words, what they mean is Jewish people have been persecuted throughout history, and their tradition is notable for the extent to which they acknowledge and mourn the suffering of the enemy. In other words, if you're taking a people that have suffered, Jews are notoriously people that have suffered throughout history, and at the same time are noted. Maybe you don't think it's enough, but think about that Jews have suffered, and they do take note of the suffering of others. Now, this one, he does say, I have quibbles, some major, some minor, with each of these points, except the last. He said, even though I referenced the last point at the bottom of the original column, the larger context obscured it and gave rise to hurt feelings that I regret. But he is, I think, bringing up in the context of his experience at a Pesach Seder a lot of the issues that are being brought up now about the suffering of the innocent Palestinians in Gaza, the terrible suffering of Palestinians in Gaza during this time, which is something that at first I didn't want to hear anything about. It took me a long time to even be able to hear that without getting upset, when somebody brought it up. Then there was a stage where I could start hearing it, but I didn't want to hear it. And then there was a stage where I'm able to talk about it and think about it. And I'm hoping we all are. I know we're not all on the same page when it comes to how we're moving through this trauma. And some of us are maybe not ready to have this discussion, but I think it's a very important discussion for us to have. It's right in front of our face, and we need to talk about it. This notion. The reason I'm talking about it tonight is because in Parshas Bo, it talks about what we call Makas Bechoros, the killing of the firstborn. That was in Egypt. And as Eric Zorn is pointing out, a lot of these are probably little kids. And we can all agree that little kids are innocent. So, and here you're talking about God. You're not talking, human beings could say, we just don't know how to do it. We can't get it exactly right, but God could get it exactly right. And still he doesn't get it exactly right. I mean, according to Eric Zorn's definition of right. So that brings up the question. This question is the question of theodicy. Why do the righteous suffer? And they're not all the same question. They're not all exactly the same question. But I just want to take a moment, since he brought this up. I happened to be just doing a little bit of research and came across something very surprising. And that is that custom that we have to drop, to do the 10 drops. So if somebody asked you, why are we doing the 10 drops?
Right.
You're going to say that explanation, that we are taking a moment to recognize that people suffered during these plagues, and our cup can't be full. It's a cup of bracha, but it can't be full knowing that there were people that suffered. Now, this explanation even appears in the Art Scroll Haggadah, like in more than one Art Scroll Haggadah. It has made its way into the mainstream. But what happened was I happened to be first looking at some article, I think it was on Chabad.org. I was looking at something, and the person said that this custom of taking of the 10 drops, this custom is attributed typically either to writings of the Abarbanel, who lived in the 1500s or late 14 and 1500s, or the Avudraham, who lived earlier, maybe in the 1300s or 1200s. So it's usually attributed to them. But this man, Dr. Rabbi Tzvi Ron, so he said it's usually attributed to them, but it doesn't appear to be in any of their work. That's what the guy at Chabad.org wrote. So this guy, Dr. Tzvi Ron, actually investigated it. He actually looked for it. Where is the beginning of this custom? Not the beginning of the custom, not just the beginning of the custom. Where is the beginning of the explanation for the custom that it's about suffering? So how far back do you imagine it goes? So at first people said it goes back to at least to 1500 or 1300. But if those people are mentioning it, the assumption is they're not the originator, that they're saying something that they know from some kind of tradition. So it would go back earlier. The truth is, that's not in our history of tradition. That's not that long ago. It sounds long ago, 500 or 700 years ago, but not that long ago when it comes to traditions. That's considered fairly modern. But even so, that would still be venerable. It would be coming from venerable sources. But it does not appear, this explanation does not appear in the Barbanel Zagara. It does not appear in the Avudraham Siddur. Nobody can find it. And it seems like it's a it's being attributed. Misattribution. It's a misattribution. He finally comes, and I'm going to take his word for it on this one. I'm not, but he finally comes to Rabbi Yirmiyahu Low. Now, this could be why why somebody said the Maharal, because he was known as Lowy, his last name, Maharal. So maybe that's why. But he lives in the middle 1800s. He is the earliest source that we can find for this notion that the reason that we do the drops is because of an acknowledgement of the suffering of the Egyptians during the plagues. The actual custom itself is earlier, but different explanations are given for the custom. They're not, that custom is not given. The custom itself goes back to like around 1200, at least. I mean, there's mention of it in this work by the Rokeach in the year 1200. So the custom is an old custom, 800 years, relatively old custom. Again, modern by our notion of tradition in general. But the early people that talked about the custom did not mention, they talked about there's actually 16 drops altogether, not just 10, because you do 10 and 3 and 3, and that Hashem's sword has 16 blades. If anything, it sounded quite the opposite. It didn't sound like this is an acknowledgement of the suffering of Egyptians. It sounded like it was more about judgment, right? God's judgment. So anyways, I was just sort of surprised by that. I will say this, the fact that it was so readily accepted as a reason and became so mainstreamed as a reason says something about our tradition as well. In other words, that we are raised to think in a way like that. And then when we hear that, it's intuitive. It fits our general way of looking at the world, that we should be concerned about the suffering of others, and acknowledge the suffering of others, even during something like the leaving of Egypt, which is about our liberation from suffering. We should acknowledge the suffering of others. The fact that in the 1850s, that explanation goes out and it spread so quickly, suggests that Jews have a affinity for that. In other words, we have a vessel for that. It fits our worldview. So it's something, by the way, that if you ask people about the Seder, even a lot of people who are not paying attention to the words of the Seder, a lot of them get that message. I think a lot of them do get that message if they're paying attention at all, that notion. And so you could say that still it shows that we are trained to think like that, the fact that we accept it so quickly. So I just thought I'd mention that because that explanation gets mentioned all the time, and it's a very modern explanation. And it gets it's attributed to people, but they didn't say it. It's attributed to a time. They didn't say it. But there is another potential source for this notion related to Pesach, which is the one that I mentioned in connection to Eric Zorn's article. And that was why we don't say Hallel on the last days. The reason we don't say Hallel on the last days. So, interestingly, that also is the subject of some discussion. If you look at the Gemara about why we don't say Hallel on the last days, the Gemara does not give that explanation. Masay yodei tavu beyam, that the creation of my hands are drowning in the sea, and you want to sing praise. So that is, again, if you ask somebody nowadays why we don't say Hallel on the last days, that's an explanation that they will give you. But it doesn't actually, it's not the Gemara's explanation. So this is, that's Zorn. Where's this one? Oh yeah, this is Rabbi Zivotofsky, who writes a lot. I've seen his work in a bunch of different places, and he does, again, good research. He's one of the people that found a lot of the exotic animals and had that, and birds that are kosher, and organized those meals. There were meals in a couple different places where you could experience some of these exotic creatures that are kosher that you may not be able to have. Is that a mitzvah to do that, or is that just well, like... it might be educational. It's not a mitzvah, I don't think. I mean, it's a mitzvah. It might be. I don't know. It might be a mitzvah to enjoy everything this world has to. It's sometimes characterized that way. I don't know what the particular mitzvah you're fulfilling, but it is said that Hashem wants you to enjoy as much as possible all the details of the creation. That famously, people will say that when you get to the next world, you might be asked, "Did you see my Alps, my Swiss Alps?" Oh, I've heard that one. Or something like that. So maybe in light of that kind of thinking, that there is something about tasting different exotic species. So this is what he writes. This is something he calls tzorach iyun. This requires more investigation. Hallel on Pesach. Misconceptions. The sole reason that we do not recite the complete Hallel on the last 6 days of Pesach is because the Egyptians drowned in the Red Sea on the 7th day of Pesach, and this human tragedy mutes our joy. Fact, the reason for half Hallel is cited in later sources. This is cited. It is cited, but it's only in later sources. But it is not the original one offered in the Talmud. The Talmudic reason relates to the Musaf sacrifices, and it's technical. The Talmudic reason is technical, not this. So, and the thing is this explanation is mentioned, and it's mentioned by very important people. Rabbi Yosef Karo. Rabbi Yosef Karo, in his commentary on the Torah, Beit Yosef, he mentions this as one of the explanations, which means it's made its way, and it made its way into the mainstream having Rabbi Yosef Karo mentioned, as far as scholarship goes, is more significant than having the Art Scroll Haggadah mention something. The Art Scroll Haggadah mentioning something is an indication of where our culture has come to, but not necessarily for scholars. It's not a strong thing for a scholar. But that the Rabbi Yosef Karo mentions something like this explanation, that's considered important even for scholars. Now, the original mention of this, of the whole thing, is a midrash. So it's earlier than Rabbi Yosef Karo, much earlier than, I don't know what the date of those midrashim are. It's from it's called, what midrash is it? It's a rare midrash. In fact, it's one of the rare mentions of the existence of this midrash, of this collection of midrash. But I don't remember. It's here somewhere. But it is even afterwards, before Rabbi Yosef Karo, it's mentioned in the 1200s in a work called the Shibbolei Haleket. It has scholarly credentials, this explanation, and it goes back a lot farther. Our one about the dipping the drops in the wine, that's going back 150 years. This one's going back 800 years. It's already being mentioned 800 years ago as a reason not to say the full
I thought you said we were doing the wine in 1200 as well.
The wine was in 1200, but not the explanation.
Got it. Okay.
Nobody said that the reason we were doing the wine was because we're feeling sad. But this one says that we don't say the full Hallel. It's already 800 years ago. And he's quoting something called, it's called Midrash Harninu. Midrash Harninu. So it's a certain collection of Midrash. He's quoting it, which means it's earlier than him. So it goes back, this explanation, it goes back, let's say 800 years. It's a lot earlier. So if somebody wanted to find the expression of this notion that even though we are meant to exult in salvation and be involved in our own, freedom, that we are still supposed to take note of the suffering of others, and not just to take note of it, but to mark it, to do something to mark it. It's an old notion. Other people would call it a very old notion. Again, we have a very long history, so we might say it's not that old. Maybe it goes back, 1,000 years. Is that old? I mean, come on. So, but it's certainly something that many, many, many generations grew up with this notion, and we who are now experiencing something like this certainly should take note of this precedent, that we, even if we can justify, which we can, what we're doing and what's happening, that at the very least we should take note of the suffering and to mark it. In other words, not just to briefly acknowledge it and then move on, but to sort of keep it with us. It sits there on the plate. Those drops, they sit there for a while. They don't just, as we're going on to say other things, those drops are still there. There's something that calls us back to it and doesn't allow us to ignore it, even while we are celebrating the victory or engaged in with a goal of victory, that we're meant to acknowledge it. So I just wanted to briefly touch on something, which is, it's just something I've been thinking about recently, and that is that what I'm going to call our circle of empathy. I'm sure I'm not the first person who ever talked about this. Yeah, in that first Meet the Parents,
the circle of trust.
The circle of trust. So he has a circle of trust. So something like that. We'll call it a circle of empathy. I really do think that this is very much involved in the mitzvah of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. The Rav Shimon Shkup, who was a very important Rosh Hashiva and Talmudic thinker and fairly contemporary, was amongst the students of Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, and he was very influential in the Telz when it comes to Telz Yeshiva and their worldview. So he wrote a book called Shari Yosher, and the introduction to his work, he's talking about the mitzvah of Kedoshim Tiyu, be holy. And he suggests that, what does it mean to be holy? He suggests what it means is to be singularly focused on the well-being of others, to be singularly focused on the well-being of others. When it says you should be holy because I'm holy, what God is saying is that's what I do. I'm singularly focused on the well-being of others, and I'd like you to be singularly focused on the well-being of others. Now, the particular mitzvah so Kedoshim Tiyu may talk about that should be our focus, and that's what it means by being holy, that we are first and foremost concerned about the well-being of others. And then you have the mitzvah of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You love your neighbor, you love your friend, you love your fellow compatriot as yourself. And Hillel's doctrine, that which is hateful unto you, don't do to others. They suggest, I'm suggesting to, I'm only doing this briefly now, but I'd be happy to have this conversation at greater length. They suggest that, I'm going to say, that we are meant to have an empathic relationship with those around us. Now, it may start with the Jewish people. There is an argument that this is specifically focused on the Jewish people, and that, but even that is a tall order. We've talked about this before, that there is no them, there is only us, which is my mantra since before October 7th, since the Yom Kippur, right before October 7th. It has been my mantra since then. There is no them, there is only us. And this is a call to empathy with those around you. Now, it is true, again, that, oh wait, so in the mitzvah of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, it does seem that the command itself is about other Jews, but even he says that eventually you're expected to broaden it to all of creation, that you are supposed to have some kind of empathic relationship with all of creation. I'm using the word empathic relationship because this is not, in other words, there are some people who say it's pragmatic, just act that way. I'm suggesting that it doesn't just mean just act that way. I know the Ramban says, Nachmanides says this, but I have all sorts of developed reasons for not going that direction. So that what it means is, so you're supposed to love other people, but do you? I mean, it's how many people do I really love? So I have a little circle. Of people that I love. So he seems to be suggesting that you should broaden that. In other words, you've got that circle, but now you're being called upon to broaden it, to extend it beyond just your immediate family, extend it beyond just family, extend it then to family and friends. Then you're extending it beyond family and friends. You keep on extending it. Now, let's say you get to this very high level, which would be very high level, and you have found that you have empathy even with people that are very far removed from your personal life. You got to a very high place, and you have empathy for, let's say, all humanity. You have empathy for all of humanity. So this is a huge accomplishment, but it comes with a great challenge. And here's the great challenge. When you feel empathy, you feel pain. And when you feel pain, you want the pain to go away. That's what we all want. I reference Equalizer 3 with Denzel Washington. The scene in the cafe where he explains this to the other guy. Your mind is telling you one thing, but your body is telling you another one. So pain will eventually, we just want pain to go away. This is how it is with pain. We immediately want it to go away. And when you feel empathy, you feel pain. Now, and then you just want pain to go away. Now, so for instance, if you see a poor person, you want them to be fed and housed, and you want things to be taken care of. But do you want them to be fed and housed and taken care of because you genuinely care about this other person? Or is it possible that you're just feeling the pain and you want the pain to go away? How would you tell? If he's not in your line of vision, then you don't care about him. I only care about him because he's at my front door. If he wasn't at my front door, I wouldn't care about it. If I'm in Africa and I'm seeing all sorts of people dying of AIDS or dying of starvation, I care about it. But the minute I go back home to Northbrook, they're not in my line of vision and I don't care about it anymore. So that could be one of the indications. I don't know, but it's something worth exploring. In other words, having this empathy comes with a challenge. Part of the challenge is causes me to explore my own motivations and where my character is and things like that. But as the pain gets worse, I can make foolish decisions. So, for instance, let's say I have a relative who is a gambling addict, and my relative comes to me and says that he needs money to pay these people he borrowed the money from. If he doesn't, they're going to break his legs. So I don't want him to get his legs broken, and he's terrified. He's terrified. I'm terrified. That's how empathy works. I'm terrified. He's terrified. So I want it to go away. But I have already been told that if he comes to you, do not give him money. And even if he says they're going to break his legs, which might be true, you can't give him the money, because if you give him the money, the next time they will kill him, because there will be a next time and they will kill him. So this is the problem with empathy. The problem with empathy is I feel the pain and I want the pain to go away. But if I gave him that money, it's not because I love him. I mean, in the sense where I really care about his well-being. I feel empathy with him, and therefore I'm suffering, and I want the suffering to go away. That's all. That's all. That's what's going on. And the problem is that there isn't always an easy answer to suffering, and suffering can't always go away. Things could be complex. You want them to be binary, either this or that, but it's not the way the world works. There's often complexities, and you would like to resolve this. You'd like to save somebody from suffering. Wouldn't you like to go into another country and just kill off all the oppressive tyrant rulers, and then the people that are suffering at their hands will be better? That's what you would think. It's never happened that way, practically. I don't know, maybe once or twice. It doesn't happen that way. You have these people, they go in, they kill off the tyrants, and then there's a new kind of misery. So somebody will say to you to not go in and just kill off everybody that you think is evil, because if you do that, you could lead to worse misery. So what do you have to do? You have to stand by when reporters are showing you what is going on inside inside of the place, and you have to feel the suffering, but you don't have an answer. This is almost intolerable because I'm suffering. I want the pain to go away, but I don't have an answer. Being able to live with that, empathy, that is why it's heroic. Is it heroic to have feelings for other people? No, I don't think so. It is an achievement. I'm not saying it's not an achievement to actually feel empathy for other people. That is a big achievement, but it's not heroic. The reason it becomes heroic to love your neighbor as yourself and have real empathy for these people, the reason it's heroic is you may not be able to solve their suffering, but you're going to feel it. You're going to feel their suffering, but you can't solve their suffering. I see it, but I don't know what to do about it. What you want me to do is not going to solve anything. 4 years from now, 10 years from now, something new is going to happen that's going to be worse. That's what's going to happen. You haven't come up, and they're just looking at you like you're some kind of unfeeling sociopath. How could you stand by and see the suffering that's going on and not want to end it? And you could have a ceasefire that will just end it. That will end it. That's true. For a moment, there will be respite. That's what somebody who's in pain is looking for. I just want respite from my suffering. But this is not how the world succeeds. It doesn't succeed when you give quick answers to suffering. So this next step is the step of heroism that is asked of people who have the empathy. You need to be, and this is my interpretation of that phrase, or at least that this is another way of applying that phrase, that it's not personal. It's strictly business. In other words, there could be times when I get it. I feel the pain. I feel the suffering, but this needs to be done. Just like somebody who's doing a surgery on somebody and the other person doesn't. I remember watching my son, Moishi, who then had to watch his daughter, Eliana, with the same thing. But I remember Moishi was having his tonsils taken out, and they put the mask on, and he was like 5, and he was struggling with the mask, and they're forcing him down. They're forcing him down on the bed, and they're forcing the mask on him. And then the doctors tell me, you have to leave, because they've got to be able to do stuff, and they don't want me watching what they're about to do. And then Moishi had the same situation with his daughter. He told me afterwards. I shared he's known for years how terrible that was for me. But these people are actually doing something that needs to happen to him, and I am going to get in the way. If I get in the way, they're not going to be able to do what he needs to be done to actually help him. But that's all I want to do. I want to fight them. I hate them. I hate them when I see them doing that to my son. I absolutely hate them. And I just want to fight them for doing it. But if they don't do what they need to do, he is going to have all sorts of issues later on. It's going to be much worse for him. And so this is something that's called, I would say, the heroism in V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. We think that the big achievement is developing empathy. No. It's now I have empathy, and I'm going to be in all sorts of situations where people are suffering. Yes, if I can resolve somebody's suffering, I should want to, and I should try to, but not if it's going to, in the situations where it's going to be worse, or also if I don't know how to solve their suffering. I don't know how to solve their suffering. So I'm meant to keep the line open. I'm meant to keep the channels open and to continue to experience their suffering, even though I don't know how to solve it. This is the heroic side of things that we're expected to do. All right, just a thought. I suggest that we do this again, but not next week. I'm going to be away next week. So next Tuesday night, we're not meeting. We will meet the Tuesday night after that. So next Tuesday night is the 23rd.
Are you celebrating your birthday?
Well, I plan on experiencing my birthday. All right, so what is today? 16th?
Affirmative.
Okay, so next week's the 23rd. So it'll be the 30th. Is the next time we will meet. I look forward to meeting then. I'm very grateful. I do not take it for granted that I get to share with you guys. And I look forward to continuing to share in the future. Be well. Hey, Rachalea.
Take care, Rabbi, and thank you.
Arona, if there's anything I could do at any point, please let me know.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Be well, people.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.